Hey everybody, welcome back to this mini lecture. This is on social media activism. I'm going to talk about three articles by Gladwell, Tufekci, and Evgeny Morozov. The first one's by Gladwell, Why the Revolution Will Not Be Tweeted. I have a couple of quotes here to talk about. First, with Facebook and Twitter, the traditional relationship between one, political authority, and two, popular will has been upended, making it easier for the powerless to collaborate, coordinate, and give voice to their concerns. It's almost a truism to say that various social media platforms have allowed various people to, at the very least, comment on and coordinate, etc., against on behalf of the activist agenda they have. Whether it's effective is something we'll be talking about soon. Gladwell talks about the ideas of weak and strong ties, originally formulated by Mark Granovetter in a classic paper. Here's a really long quote. I'll say it in the three different parts. There is strength in weak ties. Our acquaintances, not our friends, are our greatest source of new ideas and information. The internet lets us exploit the power of these kinds of distant connections with marvelous efficiency. It's terrific at the diffusion of innovation, interdisciplinary collaboration, seamlessly matching up buyers and sellers, and the logistical functions of the dating world. But weak ties seldom lead to high-risk activism. Here, Gladwell acknowledges that weak ties do have a lot of great traits about them. Innovation, collaboration, buying and selling, dating. But if you want to do something really big, really monumental, like high-risk activism where you go to a site where it might be dangerous, social media might not be the best way to do that. Some other quotes. Because networks don't have a centralized leadership structure and clear lines of authority, they have real difficulty reaching consensus and setting goals. They can't think strategically. They're chronically prone to conflict and error. How do you make difficult choices about tactics or strategy or philosophical direction when everyone has an equal say? Again, social media, it's consisting of networks. It's really great, again, to collaborate, coordinate, etc. on a low level, but really high stakes activism, when you need to reach consensus and set strong goals, that is not as easy with a network as opposed to centralized leadership and more hierarchical structures. But social media activism is simply a form of organizing which favors weak tie connections that give us access to information over strong tie connections that help us persevere in the face of danger. It makes it easier for activists to express themselves and harder for that expression to have any impact. The instruments of social media are well suited to making the existing social order more efficient. They are not a natural enemy of the status quo. Again, Gladwell talks more about the idea that social media platforms are tools, and they're just tools. They can help do something like organizing, but because of all the talk that goes on sometimes, and because of the ease of expression, there's so much expression that it's almost difficult for that expression to have any impact in a sea of other expressions. Then if I want to sort of summarize this between weak and strong ties, just compare the two sets of numbers. Weak ties are online, strong ties are offline. Weak ties are negotiated via social media or the internet, SMTI. Strong ties are through friends. Weak ties are networked. Strong ties are hierarchical. Weak ties are decentralized. Strong ties centralized. Weak ties are good for sharing ideas. Strong ties are good for decision making. And number 6, weak ties are really good for low risk activism. Strong ties are much better for high risk activism, at least according to Gladwell. Tufekci contrasts what Gladwell said and makes two major points in contrast to Gladwell. The first one, she writes, one, the key issue facing activists who wish for real social change is the mismatch between the scale of our problems, global, and the natural scale of our sociality, local. This is a profound problem, and more not less, social media is almost certainly a key element of any solution. Again, unfortunately, in our world, a lot of our problems are global, like climate change. But unfortunately, the way that we normally relate to one another is local. So there's a mismatch between those two things. Second, Tufekci brings up the point The relationship between weak and strong ties is one of complementarity and support, not one of opposition. Large pools of weaker ties are crucial to being able to build robust networks of stronger ties, and the internet uses the key to this process. Yeah, she sort of says that weak and strong ties are not opposite, but again, can complement one another. Ideally, weak ties could lead to strong ties. But, who knows? I think it depends on the activist situation, what you're actually advocating for, and what country, etc., etc. Muratov talks about the idea of digital dictatorships. Here's one quote. The belief that free and unfettered access to information combined with new tools of mobilization afforded by blogs and social networks leads to the opening up of authoritarian societies, and their eventual democratization now forms one of the pillars of techno-utopianism. If I had to sort of break this down into a formula, in the middle of the screen, 1, free info, plus 2, tech tools, equals 3, open societies and democracy. However, similar to Muratov, you may question, is there in fact techno-utopianism? And you could make a counter-argument to this idea, and maybe make up the idea of techno-dystopianism if you're going to be really opposite that idea. As Muratov continues, in fact, our debate about the internet's role in democratization, increasingly dominated by techno-utopianism, is in dire need of moderation, for there are at least as many reasons to be skeptical. Ironically, the role that the internet played in the recent events in Iran shows why. Revolutionary change that can topple strong authoritarian regimes requires a high degree of centralization among their opponents. The internet does not always help here. Again, this sort of echoes the idea that revolution needs a high degree of centralization, hierarchy, like Gladwell forwarded in his article. Some more quotes from Muratov. Facebook and Twitter empower all groups, not just the pro-Western groups that we like. To put it in a more formal framework, not all social capital created by the internet is bound to produce social goods. Social bads are inevitable as well. In Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone, he cautioned against the kumbaya interpretation of social capital, stating that networks are generally good for those inside the network, but the external effects of social capital are by no means always positive. If you use the internet at all, if you check out the comment pages on any social media network, there's usually as much good as there is bad, and depending on the venues you go to, it can be a lot more bad in fact. In summary for all this, going back to Gladwell's idea of weak and strong ties, weak ties are online via social media or the network or the internet. They are networked, they are decentralized, they're good for sharing ideas, they are good at low-risk activism. Strong ties, in contrast, are offline, via friends, hierarchical, centralized, good for decision-making in a high-risk activism, or more likely using strong ties. That was Social Media Activism. Thanks for listening. Looking forward to seeing you again soon for another mini lecture.